Hello, fellow gamers, Phreak here, and it's patch 9.6, so let's talk about what's going on in that one. This is going to be the playoff patch for LCS. I am not sure about LEC because their week 9 already ended, and depending on when their playoffs start, they may or may not be using this patch. I haven't checked up on that. I'm going to, in general, say 9.6 is probably the playoff patch. For most regions. I could be totally wrong. That's the guess I'm going to make. Keep in mind, we're pretty fast approaching the mid-season invitational. That's going to start in early-ish May. So we're going to, crown regional champions by mid-April. And they're usually playing 9.6 to do that. Around 9.8 is going to be the MSI patch. As we start talking about mid-season, there will not be a mid-season patch this year, at least not one that's defined as such. There will still be some level of systems changes that might be interesting. You occasionally see designers post stuff about that on the forums. They get posted on Reddit and whatnot. But either way, we're going to basically have most of the rest of the year be smallish changes. A couple of runes will get changed around, a couple of keystones might change, the champion change you tend to see, but I feel like we've kind of settled into reasonably small patches for the rest of the year unless something shakes up. So that's just kind of my expectation setting for this patch and the rest of them. Also, as another random thought, it feels like we're seeing less really mathy changes overall, where like base damages and ratios move around. So how much is it really? There's a few in this patch, but I'm finding that increasingly so. I don't need to use graphs and charts to show how big of a change something is in solo queue or in pro. And so whether I'm talking about patch rundown or Phreak Show, which airs every other Thursday on the LoL Esports YouTube, plugging Phreak Show, youtube.com/LOL Esports. Next episode will come out in about a week and a half or a week and 1 day. Anyway, let's move on and start talking about stuff. So 9.6 is, of course, the follow-up patch on Kayle and Morgana's reworks. Morgana did end up power positive. She is a very strong champion. That said, she is not getting nerfed this patch. Instead, it is Kayle who has been growing pretty rapidly in power level as people are learning to indeed play Kleptomancy with this champion. Like right now, her top lane win rate is 52%, and honestly more like 54%. As the first few days of the patch, people who are bad at Kayle, and now she's just a 54% top laner. This champion is very strong. In real time, of course, this patch is not hitting pro play for another week, but my understanding was Kayle was disabled from pro play, at least in North America, for this previous week's worth of games. She is going to be enabled in this coming week's worth of games. So week 9 of LCS may very well see a lot of Kayle in it because I think she is actually demonstrably very powerful. Now, what's interesting is Kayle's win rate on a day-to-day basis is around 53-54%, which is quite high. Her ban rate has been steadily dropping, and it's now as low as 20 to 15% worldwide. Now, this is from public data. Actual official data, which is more reliable sourcing, maybe is a little bit different, but either way, what it comes down to is Kayle is absolutely, definitely an overpowered top laner, a decent mid laner, and a weak jungler. That is her state as a champion. That's what I believe. So 0.5 lower on the attack damage growth, 0.5% lower on the attack speed growth. Those are obviously nerfs, but she's getting a slew of buffs afterwards. Her default adaptive stat being attack damage is actually positive for her. She doesn't cast very many spells early on. Plus, when you have her E, well, it doesn't really matter in this case, never mind. But either way, just you have to auto attack to last hit minions, and attack damage, of course, the better stat for that. So that's really relevant as well. And ultimately, this is a buff. People have realized that Rune King Rageblade is in fact the right build for Kayle, especially because she has to hit frontline. She does not have great target access. So because she's hitting frontline, turns out Blade of the Rune King's quite good for that. Okay, cool. There's this champion. This will buff her slightly. People have kind of learned her basic build, but not everyone. Her actual highest pick rate first item is still Nashor's Tooth, which is a much lower win rate item than, for example, Blade of the Rune King. So that kind of stuff's happening. Okay, either way, this will be a small buff. We saw this happen with Kai'Sa as well, for example, the AD carry item update. she got destroyed in win rate, but it wasn't because she was weaker. It was because people were buying old Stormrazor first item. After the buff, Stormrazor first is decent, but different topic. Anyway, Celestial Blessing losing 20% of its ability power ratio on the heal. Not on the heal, on the movement speed. Okay, fair enough. The heal is actually fairly weak overall, and you max it last anyway. Also, generally, Kayle doesn't get a lot of ability power regardless. I actually almost don't think you need this nerf because the really strong Kayles are, as far as I can tell, attack damage Kayle, and AP Kayle isn't quite as good, but maybe I'm missing something. That could be totally true. Either way, it is a small nerf that won't mean too much. The buff actually happening the second you cast it is a positive. Not pausing for dramatic effect afterwards is a positive. So there's actually lots of buffs here to these abilities. The E cast time getting shorter because of Kayle's attack speed scaling up over time. Properly critting is actually pretty useful. I think the right build for this champion is actually Rune King Rageblade, i.e. Hurricane, or if not Hurricane, something else. But I think the proper Kayle build is crit Kayle, and as you saw in LCS cooldown, crit Kayle is the best. I'm a genius. So overall, these changes, this is fairly meaningful. I actually have the numbers right here. I do want to point out that Kayle's E has a total attack damage ratio, which means simply leveling up raises Kayle's E damage. Now, that has been rolled into these calculations that if you simply never buy an item and have no runes at all, and you rank your abilities the way you normally rank your abilities, this is her old and new DPS. It's down about 17% as a baseline by level 18, and down quite a bit less in the early game. As with all changes to base stats, the more you buy items, the less this matters, but this is still a fairly meaningful overall DPS cut. It is eventually 8.5 attack damage, 8.5% attack speed. That's non-trivial. It's a few hundred gold worth of stats, and it matters. It's not huge, but she'll lose. Just from this would be a good 1.5 to 2% win rate, I'm pretty sure. Maybe, I'd stick about 1.5%. This is a buff, this is a buff, this is a very meaningless nerf, this is a buff, and this is a buff. I don't think it's still enough that Kayle's going to gain win rate, but what you are going to see is actually a statistical aberration where Kayle's overall win rate, for example, in top lane this patch, overall is 52%. However, for the last 6 or 7 days straight, she's been 53 to 54. So if you did a power neutral, if you literally didn't change the champion at all, her win rate would go from 52 to 53.5, just because people learned the champion, not because she actually got stronger. So if you ever see someone post like, hey, by the way, here's some data, here's where her win rate moved, according to Lawlytics, for example, her win rate is actually 1.5% higher than the data tells you it is, if that makes sense, right? Because we've already done the getting good at Kayle growth, now that's plateaued. Hope that made sense. Either way, Kayle will probably remain a like 52% or so win rate top laner after the patch, and I think she'll be pro viable. Well, she's certainly solo queue viable. I am not certain about pro viable. Next up are some changes to Neeko, and Neeko, to be fair, is actually a pretty reasonable champion to change here. So as I look up Neeko in solo queue statistics, though she had been a very, very high win rate top laner or whatnot for a while, 53% and so on, post hotfix, her win rate immediately plummeted to sub 50. So Neeko is currently a sub 50 win rate champion in most roles. She is above 50 in mid lane. She is sub 50 in bot lane. Generally speaking, on-hit Neeko is slightly weak, and I think Mage Neeko is totally fine. Of course, if you look at like historical Neeko power level, she's been a 50% win rate champion for basically forever. And then people, of course, realize that turns out that you can build on-hit and you're broken. So the overall set of changes, once you consider this patch coming in and the previous patch giving her extra root duration, is that she has a much higher root duration, a worse rank up on W, and worse attack damage scaling. In general, that is a positive for Mage Neeko. I think overall, Mage Neeko is a stronger champion than before. On-hit Neeko getting slightly softened in this nerf, which is fine. Takes her from broken, overpowered to simply reasonable. But that said, Neeko was getting some play in pro already, and it was mostly on-hit Neeko. So I think we will certainly see on-hit Neeko remain the go-to build in pro, it seems. And with this buff coming back in, she will definitely be around there. She's certainly going to be in meta, whatever that means. But it means we're going to see her a fair bit. This bug fix, though, does matter. This is, of course, a bug fix nerf to on-hit Neeko. There was a chance you could get the W to trigger twice, which is obviously a very, very big deal and a lot of extra damage. So it is possible that these changes in total will actually nerf on-hit Neeko. I'm not certain. I'm not really sure how often this really happened. Of course, this only matters in the later game, and so did this. So it's hard for me to know for sure. But I really do think Mage Neeko is totally viable, and you should be willing to play her, and it's totally fine. Next up is Ornn, who got quite a few very small changes. Look at my wares is nice. Recommend items are better. That's good too. I always like this. That's always cool to see. That can sometimes mean a win rate bump, which is surprising, but it really happens. You can't upgrade ally items during your E and R, which counts as your dash. That's good. That's a nice little bug fix thing there. They're doing it for real this time, that the the Q won't expire mid-E. They tried before, it didn't work. They're trying again to make this work. And a small cooldown buff to Bellow's Breath. Overall, these are fairly nice small things to the champion. I'm looking up solo Q win rate right now real quick. He is pretty much fine as a top laner. He's 48.5%, which is pretty reasonable for most tanks, I feel. Looking at pro data for Ornn, he's not seen very much. I think he saw a couple of plays over in North America, but he's not seen very much. But I really do think that tanks are viable in pro play. Ornn is one of the viable tanks. And overall, these are some nice little small changes that will give him maybe 0.5% win rate, but I think Ornn is generally fine as a champion. Next up, though, is a pretty big thing. It is Urgot, and this is a very large change. This is, to me, on the scale of a small-scale rework. Actually, let me phrase it this way. I think Urgot's changes are bigger than Morgana's changes in the previous patch. Not visually, obviously, but this actually heavily changes who Urgot is as a champion. So we'll get the really basic, easy stuff out of the way. Base mana up by 40, mana regen growth up by 0.2. Here is this graph, or this chart. I'm going to zoom out so it's a little bit less blurry. So the mana pool is up 13 to 4%. The mana regen up 0 to 19% in terms of mana per minute. Worth noting that Urgot refills his mana bar in about 4 minutes of doing nothing. Just thought you'd like to know. About the same at level 1, interestingly. That this is sort of a similar ratio of about 1/4 of the mana pool per minute. I didn't know that, but now I do. Cool. Anyway, let's talk about what else is going on with Urgot. Higher damage champion, as you don't get the fall off here for 10% reduced damage. Now, what this really meant is if you got 5 passive procs by completely circling a champion, instead of getting essentially 5 triggers, you got 4.1 triggers, which is, a damage drop off, but you very frequently did not get 5 echoing flames off on the same champion within 5 seconds. You got like 2, which compares 1.9 to 2, which is barely a nerf at all. Well, in this case, obviously a buff. So this matters. It doesn't mean a ton, but it does matter. It exists. He is a higher damage champion, just not absurdly so. Q is unchanged entirely. W no longer grants you the shield. That's been moved to the E. The mana cost is getting lower and lower and lower, and the cooldown becomes a toggle at max rank. So it is a cheaper ability, but it doesn't give you a shield. Instead, you get to cast it more often. Okay, so it's now a damage ability with the on-hit damage reduction going to 0.5, which means, for example, Blade of the Rune King Urgot becomes way more viable because he still hits you like 3 times a second, and it was never possible for Urgot to get that kind of attack speed normally, so plus attack while moving, etc., etc. So this is a really big deal where now Blade of the Rune King Urgot can totally be a real thing, or Wit's End for a similar reason, or any other on-hit item you might care about which don't otherwise exist. But, theoretically. So this definitely matters, and this definitely matters, and this definitely matters. Wow, that's a really big change to the W. It's, of course, cheaper, and of course the cooldown is shorter, and the fact that it's a true toggle is a really big deal. Of course, stacks with this, because you just stay in turret form and just get your passive over and over and over again on them. Okay, that's a really big change to how this champion functions. You can go turret form forever, not within a window. But the shield moving is, of course, a pretty big deal. Technically, it is stronger and then weaker, but it has a 1.5 bonus attack damage ratio on it, so it's kind of like Riven, everyone's favorite champion, where you can convert attack damage into defensive power, further bribing you to build attack damage items, like Blade of the Rune King or a Death Stance. The damage has been changed from this with a total attack damage ratio to this with a bonus attack damage ratio. Notice that the ratio is higher and the base damage is lower, meaning you need to build attack damage to get the same damage out of it. But of course, you have a better cooldown, which is nice. Mana cost is only going to matter at levels 14 and higher, so we're going to mostly ignore this, and even when the mana cost goes up, hey, by the way, his mana is better, and his mana is better. I don't know why you buff his base mana when you already did this to make the mana cost easier, but you do you, game designer. Okay, let's start unpacking those things. Here is his shielding before and after. You, of course, used to max W second, so 30 to 150 by level 13. Now you max it last because you max E last, so it's 60 to 140 based on rank, and you max it by the very, very end. Of course, the shield is strictly better in the first 7 levels, the same at levels 8 through 9, and even though it's worse at levels 10 and above, it's worse by so little that buying 20 and at most 60, at level 13, 60 attack damage, I mean, Cleaver's already 40, and Runes probably give you the other 20. So in the real world, and every Urgot always bought at least Black Cleaver, let's be real. So in the real world, this shield is definitively always stronger. And now it is not accessed on the W, which is relevant. It's accessed on the E, right? So instead of your shield having a 17 to 9 second cooldown based on rank, and from level 10, it's at 13. It's just always at 14, and to get the shield, you must burn your escape. So that's a really, really big deal. If you want to use a shield to trade with someone, you have to burn your escape, which is a pretty long cooldown. This is a very large reshape to the champion. Now, of course, the rest of the Urgot changes. Let's talk about this E damage. Here is the E damage. It is definitively worse unless you buy attack damage. Now, in the early game, runes cover this. Dorn's Blade covers this, although to be fair, Corrupting Potion is typically what you built. Okay, getting Black Cleaver by level 12-ish, that's easy to do, of course. Like, by this point, we're clearly doing this. Okay, but as the ranks come in and it gets worse and worse and worse, you've got to actually build some real attack damage for Disdain's Flip to do the same damage as before. You don't get to 126 without trying to do that. I mean, Black Cleaver and Runes won't even get you to 71, so in the late game, the E will do less damage unless you build more attack damage, which was the intended change. But for a lot of the early game, like you buy a Phage right here, it's more damage. Okay, so there's that change. Mana cost, again, whatever. Cooldown, also kind of whatever. The last major change is the ult range going much, much, much higher. This is really significant. It is like a 60% or so range increase. That's a really, really, really big deal. It gained 900. The cast time got slightly slower, enough that you can probably react to it on LAN. And the damage got changed from a total AD ratio to a bonus AD ratio. This seems really fiddly. I know they're like, hey, we're just going to make Urgot have bonus attack damage ratios. But if the ratio is the same, why does it matter? This feels fiddly to me, personally. But either way, it means the damage is higher at early ranks and lower at later ranks because of math. Again, it's the same attack damage ratio, so the more attack damage you buy, like the less this matters, but pretty substantial damage difference, honestly. That's all I can really say. This is a pretty substantial damage difference. Gaining 35 damage on your R is not trivial when you consider that most of the other stuff do more damage as well. Again, we look at the E from early on, and I mean, okay, yeah, as long as you get 2 longswords back by the time you get 6, you're doing more damage pretty much everywhere. So we'll see. We'll see what this actually means. It's really hard to say because, again, the fact that you don't get to shield yourself on a basic trading spell, you have to burn all of your cooldowns to do useful things. That is a big deal. He has been compensated in raw power pretty substantially. I would say the raw power levels of the champion are up, but this matters. This matters. Ultimately, I still believe this is a buff to the champion. Urgot is certainly very powerful, or at least, sorry, was before the mana cost nerfs. Ultimately, if you look at sort of historic win rates for the champion, he did gain some win rate back, but he's still at like 45% in solo queue, which is not very good. And if you look at Urgot in pro play across 9.5, he's 7% presence. So Urgot is undeniably a much weaker champion and not particularly strong. So these changes being power up is the correct thing to do for the character. And I also think that pushing Urgot towards more attack damage focused builds tends to bridge the gap between solo queue and pro. It just tends to. Champions that are lane bullies and also tanks tend to be pro-only champions. Urgot, Aatrox kind of. You look at old Gnar and things like that. That tends to be really pro-focused, so pushing towards AD is a good thing for Urgot. I think that's cool. All right, next up, small things towards Aatrox. He is now better into Vladimir. Doesn't lose his passive when reviving. That's good. Caitlyn getting a flat 50 damage on the ultimate. She's not in a terrible spot, I don't think, but as I type in for solo queue stats, we're going to see that she is, I think, completely reasonable. She is above 50% win rate in solo queue. Seems to be completely fine. As far as pro is concerned, no one's playing her right now, although that's mostly because they'd rather play Kalista and Lucian as lane bullies as opposed to Caitlyn. I think Caitlyn can still be totally fine in this case, but they just rather not play her. Whatever, that's fine. I think she's totally viable, though. Next up, more small buffs to Gnar. I was wrong in my earlier Phreak Show episode where I said Gnar was going to come back to pro play. That was not true. You're in Mega Gnar so little that the extra stats didn't really matter. Overall, seems to be weak in solo queue, seems to be fairly weak. And by weak, I mean not seen at all in pro play. So more buffs to Gnar. This is specifically the melee range, or the melee form, the Mega Form W. We'll see if this actually matters a whole lot. I feel like it doesn't, but it will be a small buff to Gnar, so that's kind of cool. I don't know. We'll see when he actually shows up in pro. Minus Hecarim is kind of nice. I feel like Hecarim's not that bad, but as I look at his solo queue stats, he is, yeah, I think he's fairly reasonable. He's 50% win rate basically everywhere. But I guess Minus is this champion who I guess is on the lower side of overall power, so cool. All right. Whatever. This means some. You max it first, so this arguably means more just because Q is a large portion of your damage profile as a champion, compared to, like, say, buffs to W's damage, which doesn't mean anything. So this is a fairly meaningful damage upgrade. It's going to help him in longer range, longer duration fights. Okay, cool. Nice little usability thing with the W on the Ivern. That's nice. Here we go. Nerfs to Jayce. I'm sure everyone is very, very happy. He's not been absurdly good in solo queue. He's certainly on the strong side in solo queue. He's 51-ish, and he's also been, I think, the actual #1 champion in pro play. Actually, he's #2 behind Lissandra. Lissandra's actually risen up to #1 as of late, interestingly enough. She had fallen down for a bit and then kind of repassed everyone else and is back up here. A lot of that being that she has a very high ban rate, as that people are just like, I guess, a little bit afraid of her. But either way, Jayce is strong in solo queue, strong in pro play. So nerfs to his base health, nerfs to health growth, same for regen. Here are the numbers on Jayce, losing 3 to 5% of his health bar, although still pretty healthy overall as a champion. Losing some decent health regen overall. Of note, 10 minutes to refill your health. More like 8 at level 1. I'm starting to take note of, like, hey, what are these timings? I'm kind of curious. So there you go. Cool. Yeah, overall, it's a pretty meaningful health nerf. This definitely matters. 26 health in the early game to about 100 in the late game. And the regen going down as well means if you want to play a ranged matchup into Jayce, you have the chance of poking him out. If you play an all-in matchup like, I don't know, Maokai with ganks, you're more likely to all-in him. This, I think, is good. Jayce is a lane bully, and to play Jayce aggressively in lane, you must, play up against their turret, and it means you might be caught out, you might get ganked, you might get jumped on, so I think this is the right kind of nerf to give to the champion. This really doesn't lower his satisfaction very much, but it will make him lose more games, and it'll make people feel a little more empowered to stop him. So that seems pretty positive. Next up, a minor ability power issue to the Q. Yeah, I mean, their logic is, well, this is basically a non-skillful expression of LeBlanc, so go be more skillful at LeBlanc if you want to do all your damage. I think that's reasonable. I was seeing Reddit comments that are like, but why didn't you nerf the other things? Now her late game's worse. Like, it's fine for your late game to be bad. That can just be what LeBlanc does. LeBlanc must split push into victory. You can't just one-shot the Kalista in a team fight. Go be skillful. I think that's fine. I don't think she needs to be able to one-shot people to be useful late game. She is uncatchable as a split pusher. That's good. Next up, some small buffs to Nautilus, gaining a pretty decent 3.5 armor. Technically, this was like 0.469 or something stupid, but glad that we are seeing round numbers. Staggering glow cooldown, actually pretty meaningful here as well. Here is that data table. So old armor, new armor, physical durability up about 3 to 2%. Right, obviously not that big of a deal. It's only about 3.5 armor. We knew it wasn't going to be that big of a deal, but hey, he is more resilient as a laner now. That's good. Resilient laning seems to be something that Nautilus sort of needs. Looking up solo queue stats, Nautilus is actually fairly close to playable. He's 49%-ish win rate, both top and support. So very small buffs would be all it takes to make him essentially balanced. The passive cooldown actually a pretty big difference here from 9 to 6 in the early game. And it changes at levels 6, 11, and 16. So you're getting this cooldown buff for a very, very long time. It takes a long time to catch up to what this was. This was 16 plus on Nautilus. This is going to take a while. This disproportionately buffs both support and jungle Nautilus as they get less levels. Keep in mind that Staggering Blow, in fact, does deal damage, so it helps jungle Nautilus deal more damage to targets. He'll get a few extra Staggering Blows off while clearing camps. So that can matter as well. Overall, I'm actually a little bit, well, I'm not actually surprised that we don't see Nautilus jungle at all, but I think he could be viable, to be honest. We just don't see him. And either way, yeah, I think this champion is, with these changes, is completely viable. Now, he's not going to be super popular. Nautilus, I think, never really has been, but I think he's going to be totally, completely viable. Next up is small nerfs to Rek'Sai. These are ones I'm talking about where I don't feel like the math really mattered. 0, 10, 20 seconds off the cooldown. Keep in mind, Rek'Sai pretty much always went Warrior Black Cleaver. So this ended up being like a, 42-second cooldown, which is now something more like 56, around that. This does matter. Actually, this especially matters right here. This ratio does matter quite a bit. To be fair, I could have done the math. I'm like, hey, what is Rek'Sai's ultimate damage with Warrior Cleaver at various points in the game? And I could have. But essentially, you're losing 25 damage per 100 attack damage bot, which is Warrior Cleaver, which is non-trivial, but not massive. Rek'Sai definitely overall very powerful. Has a pro presence of about 2/3, which is quite high. It's definitely highest of the junglers. As far as solo queue is concerned, she's pretty high win rate as well. As was mentioned before, the nerfs to Conqueror weren't really going to push her down. She can use other things instead. And as it stands, people are actually using Conqueror on her anyway. Doesn't need to, but they are. I think the Hail Bit's still very good, but whatever. Either way, yeah, Rek'Sai seems fine and will remain fine. It will remain still very strong overall. Certainly not going away. Next up, buffs to Shen. The base on hit damage of Twilight Assault going up +5 to 10 based on champion level. Here is this. Now, keep in mind this includes several things. This is Shen's base AD exists. It's the automatic on-hit damage on the Q, and it is the unempowered % health damage of the Q, assuming that Shen himself is your target. Again, the damage is up 5 to 10 based on what level the champion is. And overall, assuming you were hitting a similar champion, aka Shen, it is a 7 to 5% damage bump. Now, last I saw, Shen was still a Tiamat user and did buy some raw attack damage so that he could fight a bit better and have that extra bit of wave clear. That's probably still true. Overall, cool little buffs to Shen. Looking at solo queue win rate, he is definitely a little bit weak, but really, again, not terrible. He's another tank sitting at around 49%. He's really not that far off. And this might be enough to help him last hit under turret when the waves get pushed in. We know that one can be a little bit contentious. Overall, yeah. Small buffs to Shen. This will be probably to the tune of less than 1%. Again, he's sitting very close to 50 already. And if you like playing tanks, Shen is indeed viable. Now, next up is Sylas, who, of course, was disabled last week, so we had no way of knowing exactly how much of Sylas we were supposed to see, how popular he was going to be in pro play. But what we do know is that as a mid laner, Sylas is totally very strong, 52% or so win rate, very similar in top lane, pretty decent jungler here as well. Sylas is definitely an overall strong champion. So a revert of the health ratio on the W, back down to 0.4. A revert on the low health healing actually is kind of nice. I do think it doesn't need to be double the healing when low, so overall less sustained for the champion, making it a little bit more risky. That seems good. These nerfs seem very small. I think he will still remain above 50% win rate in solo queue in most relevant roles. As far as pro is concerned, I think we'll see Sylas. I think Sylas is good enough to see pro play, but again, pointing out before that this actually further nerfs tank Sylas. I think tank Sylas is not the correct build. In solo queue or in pro play. I think you shouldn't be playing tank Sylas, and so don't do it. Next up, some more buffs to Trundle. A little while ago, this went from 20 to 80 to 20 to 100. Now they're keeping the 100 at the top level, but they're buffing the rank 1 here as well. This now lowers the incentive to max W second, although maxing W second is his optimal build. I think the right way to play Trundle is indeed as a fighter who does deal some damage and wants to beat the crap out of some people. Overall, Trundle, I think, is at a fairly weak, but in some cases acceptable spot. His best role is jungle at 47 and change, which is indeed quite low. But looking at statistics, basically he's a 49% jungler if you don't max E second. That's, yeah, I don't know. I mean, ultimately, what it comes down to, and forget really the data I'm bringing up here, Trundle ends up being a slightly weak champion. That is a fact. Trundle is still on the weak side. The buffs to W max got him a little bit closer. He's still on the weak side, so they're buffing it furthermore. Even if you do max W first or second, okay, you won't max it first anymore, but even if you max W second, you're still going to get some power out of this up through the first several ranks. Obviously, like rank 4 is not very much, rank 5 is the same, but you'll get power in the early game. This helps Pillar max a little bit because you still get 30% attack speed, which is kind of cool. So, small buffs to Trundle, still not going to mean a ton, but it will buff him another close to 1%, I think. So, he'll get a little bit more viable, and that's cool. I don't mind seeing Trundle back if it's not just the full tank Pillar bot. And I think with the fact that W's getting all the buffs, he won't be. Pretty big buffs to Xayah, though. This is actually a quite big deal. She is definitely on the weak side as far as solo queue is concerned. As far as pro player, I actually see her a little bit, looking at 9.5 across top 5 regions for bot lane. She actually, okay, I take it back. She's seeing almost no play at all. I remembered seeing her more than I actually saw her. She is like 15th in line for pick rate in pro and bot lane. We saw some Rakan buffs in 9.5. That was cool. We started to see some Rakan. Didn't get to see that much Xayah alongside it. Data points to Xayah definitely deserving of buffs. And indeed, here we are. Bonus attack speed is in, and pretty substantially so. Oh, by the way, here's Trundle attack speed. Counting his actual base stats and whatnot, and assuming you still max a second, it's still an 8% attack speed buff overall throughout most of the early game. Even as you gain some levels, you're still overall attacking 8% more frequently. Dirt definitely does matter. It does matter for jungle clear, does matter for early laning. Certainly going to be effective there for Trundle. So again, 1% or so seems pretty reasonable. Xayah attack speed buff is actually pretty nice. Similar 8% attack speed growth in the early game. You're going to max this 1 second in almost all cases. Goes up to about 15% more attack speed growth. As always, in the real world, you buy things like Berserker's Greaves and, Hurricane and whatnot, so you're getting slightly less in the real world, but still very, very relevant. What's also nice about this build is it buffs my favorite build, which is doing Essence Reaver and Infinity Edge. Not only does Essence Reaver matter because you want this cooldown to be back more often, because you want to get these attacks off, you want to get this buff back on so you can use it, but also building a heavy attack damage build without attack speed is compensated by the W attack speed being so high, giving you what you need anyway. This is pretty substantial. This is well above 1% win rate. I would be shocked if Xayah was not a 50% win rate champion after these changes. This seems quite big. She'll be in a good spot. Next up, nerfs to Zoe, who has fallen a little bit in pro priority, but is still up there at 70%, which is reasonably high. She had been 70% plus in pro for most of the year at this point. As far as solo queue is concerned, Zoe is sitting at a roughly balanced spot at about 50%, but her ban rate is reasonably high, so, understandable here. Either way, it is a fairly moderate 4 to 2 second nerf on Sleepy Trouble Bubble. And I believe you max this indeed second. The slow going down a little bit as well. So here is this data table. I'm going to double check that I was indeed correct about her ability orders. And yes, by far Emax is higher win rate and higher pick rate. So that was the correct assumption. That's good just to make sure I was right about that one. But yeah, 49.8% win rate mid laner as far as Loalytics is concerned. So she's more or less fine in solo queue. Ban rate is elevated but not absurd. But here's the cooldown difference. Fairly meaningful, absolutely. Definitely does matter. Way less sleep poke. More windows to play around her when she goes for this and misses the ability. That's kind of a good thing. As far as how much move speed you actually have after being slowed, of course, it's not changed in the first 7 levels of the character, but 6 to 29% more movement sort of allowed as a result of the changes. This I technically did kind of backwards, to be honest, but that's okay. Ultimately, I did 1 minus the numbers, then divided by each other. This should be 1 over the other, it's either way. What it essentially means is, yeah, you're moving 29% faster, basically, while hit by this bubble. So, it does matter a little bit. Maybe you get behind a minion, maybe you get behind something else. This will definitely drop Zoe's win rate a good 1.5% in solo queue, maybe even more. I can see you're losing 2%. Well, that's not really true. I'd go with 1.5% probably. As far as pro is concerned, I think she will drop some in presence. As overall mid laners are concerned, Lissandra, LeBlanc, Jayce, Zoe, Ryze are top 4. As far as champs are concerned overall. What it comes down to is Lissandra's going to remain queen. LeBlanc's not going to move very much. Jayce will go down a fair bit, and Zoe will go down a little bit. So we'll see Ryze kind of climb towards the top, and maybe we'll see a couple other mid laners show up a bit more often, things like Syndra. It's just sort of generic blind pick mids. It'll just shake things up a little bit. We'll see what comes up afterwards. I don't think Zoe's really suppressing any picks necessarily. Not that I know. I don't really know mid lane that well, but it doesn't feel like she's suppressing things because she's not always blinded, and in fact, her ban rate's very high. So, like, in any game where she's banned, she can't be suppressing other champions, so other champs are getting played. Anyone who's getting banned a lot, by definition, can't be suppressing other picks. Just FYI on that. Next up, tiers no longer stack, which means 2 things. It means Archangels plus Manamune can no longer exist, which means Ezreal's favorite build is gone. It also means the 6-tier griefing build is gone as well. We'll see if people decide to pick something else 6 times as a result, but I feel like they won't. I think this will actually reduce the number of people who do, we're losing 6 tiers before the game ends, because tier 5 mana crystals is not as satisfying as 6 tiers, so you just won't do it as much. Either way, it'll be nerfs to Ezreal. Ezreal has certainly been fairly high presence for a while. He's actually fallen down to the number 3 presence bot laner. That's a little fraudulent, though, because the number 1 in presence is Kalista, with a really high ban rate, but actually a fairly low pick rate, which means in games where she's not banned, people aren't picking her anyway. So Kalista's presence is high because of fear, less so because of objective raw power, it feels like. That teams are more afraid of Kalista than Kalista is good. Her pick rate would match her ban rate if she was to be so good, but instead her ban rate is carrying her presence here. Just a random aside, I kind of wanted to bring that up. Okay. Overall, though, Kalista will probably remain top of the pile. Ezreal will certainly go down a fair bit of presence. He was already down to 45% in pro play this patch. Thing is, Ezreal's not actually going to be really power negative here anyway. I think he's totally fine just to go Manamune, Trinity Force, or Iceborne, and just get Blade of the Ruin King third and just build regular stuff. Yes, the ability power was nice. Yes, you got to do really good damage with your ultimate and things like that. Yes, the AP did matter some. The mana pool did matter some. It gave you more attack damage. But it was okay to build other things. So it's really not going to be that big of a deal. Now, what you will see is people will finish their Manamune, then they will buy a Lost Chapter and go, wait, I can't buy Archangels. And they will either go Ludens, which I think is actually viable. I think it's fine. Not as good as Archangels, don't get me wrong, but playable. Or they will sell it and lose, 120 gold or whatever the number actually is for what they did with their transgressions. So I think it's like 300 actually. Either way, this is going to end up being a negative win rate to Ezreal, but he will climb back up somewhat. I don't think it'll end up being power neutral, at least not in a game where people are playing optimally, because options can always be positives, but this is not as big of a deal. Like, Ezreal should still be playable. And I think if people are like, Ezreal's not playable anymore, you're just wrong. Like, you're just wrong if you think Ezreal's not playable after this change. You can now buy 2 Brawler's Gloves, which is good for Phantom Dancer users. That's nice. This is a cool change. I like this a lot. So Minion Dematerializer was used by basically all 3 lanes in pro play. Mid laners ran it, most top laners ran it, and almost every single tank support ran it. And it's because you got 6 charges, you could always get every cannon minion, you could keep lane pressure for a very long time, you could do a lot with this rune, and push, and wave pressure is disproportionately useful in pro play. So it's down to 3 charges. As a compensation, of course, you're getting more bonus damage for multi-use on charges, and of course the cooldown starts a little bit sooner on, which is actually kind of cheeky because it means you use your first charge really early on, and you run out of charges really quickly. I mean, this is kind of whatever, honestly, who really cares? But here is Dematerializer bonus damage based on how many times you used it on a target. If you were to dematerialize 6 cannons straight up, you got 9% bonus damage against them. If you dematerialize 3 cannons straight up, you get 12% damage against them. So you can match that number. And in fact, if you go cannon, melee, that works as well. The only difference, of course, is if you did go 1 melee, 1 ranged, 4 cannons, you would get 7%. And if you went 1-1-1, now you're at 6%. So your cannon killing can be technically slightly worse. But if you really just did go cannon, 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 you do have more bonus damage. You just simply have less overall wave clear because you're not one-shotting the next 3 cannons. Hope that all makes sense. There's the math there. Again, here's a quick look at that data table. Also, really, ultimately, this is mostly just cleanup. This doesn't really make very large changes in the overall value of wave clear on the rune. It doesn't really mean that much. What it does mean is you get 3 charges instead of 6. That definitely matters a lot. This actually, what's interesting as well, is this helps pro play go away from tank supports, because now you just don't get as much wave clear by being Braum with Dematerializer. You're less likely to not only run Dematerializer, but run Braum for the wave clear. This has a very small nudging effect on this. And this won't break the camel's back, but is one more straw put on top of it. Next up, a small nerf to overheal as well. Also a must pick with pro. And they're going to do a pretty big nerf to the conversion through the early and mid game. Now, this might not look very big on paper, but here's the actual chart. And here's what it looks like in the real world. A pretty sizable nerf for most levels. Keep in mind, most AD carries didn't reach level 18 in a pro game, even solo queue either. Excuse me. Anyway. Now, that said, if you ever overcapped your shield and healed so much that you filled out that shield, this nerf will mean less because you're gonna get close to the overcap anyway. But if you weren't overcapping, then you get this much less shielding out of it. Seems fairly meaningful. Seems like it's gonna matter. All right, next up, nerfs to bounties. Lots going on. Let's talk about them specifically. Minion and monster gold bounties are down by 1/4. Instead of getting 1/3 of your bonus gold, 1/4 of your bonus gold is going to be what goes into the bounty. And it's 1/4 of the gold you earned over the entire enemy team's average. So if everyone earned 200 gold, and you earned 400 gold, they can get 50 of that 200 back from you, right? If they earned 200, 200, 200, 200, and you earned 400, one of them gets 50 gold back. But you outfarmed each one of those by that much. And let's be real, let's extrapolate. Let's say your entire team is doing this, 200 above, 200 above, 200 above, 200 above. On 4 farming rolls, they can get 1/4 of that difference back. And that doesn't seem too crazy. That seems fairly reasonable to me. What's nice is now it can decrease, which is really, really good. I am glad this. I think this arguably should have been part of the minimum viable product. That this probably should have shipped with the change. In retrospect, I really think it should have. I think this was an oops. It was a mistake. I know it definitely caused some grief among players, and ultimately that is not something to ignore. I'm glad it's here now. I think it's unlucky or whatever that it wasn't here earlier, but such as it is. A little bit of extra ease of reading this. I know Riot has tons of data around how much money the supports actually earn. And so they're saying, okay, supports earn about 30% as much earned gold as everyone else. Keep in mind, right, assists don't contribute to CS bounties, kills don't contribute to CS bounties, turrets don't contribute to CS bounties, passive GP10 doesn't contribute to CS bounties. It's only gold earned from killing minions, killing monsters, and in this case now earning it from support gold. And Riot has absurd amounts of data to know that that ratio is 30%. So 30% is added to the overall dividing pool, and the support gold income is getting added in. What this does is it actually allows supports, I assume, to earn gold bounties. Yep, indeed is right there. And it's now more overall, yeah, maybe we should call them income bounties. That's fair. And it allows you to overall have a slightly better look at, okay, look, their bot lane is blasting our bot lane. I don't need a bounty. Look how much Zyra's farming. So that's good. Boom. Cool. Okay, let's move on. What else is happening? The scoreboard only reflects the bonus gold. And this is something that I think is really, really, really worth harping on, because it is something that also ended up being the right choice. And what's funny is I'm going to take a quick diatribe because people seem to say they like these things. I actually really enjoy the design tenet of using large numbers whenever possible. For example, in a game like, let's say, Borderlands, you have a buff that stacks when you shoot an enemy. And the stack cap is 9,999. Now, realistically, the designers know combat is not ever going that long. Like, they have designed out, generally speaking, how long and how big combat encounters are, and they are not 9,000 bullets long. They are a couple hundred bullets long, or it's per kill in a streak, and they know that they can never even put 50 enemies in the same map at the same time because of engine limitations. I'm making stuff up, but bear with me. It doesn't matter if the actual monster cap is 50. If you say it scales to infinity, that's just exciting as a player. Just by itself, without the power being literally different at all, because it can never actually be different than that, just sneaking in the promise of scaling to infinity, like Gathering Storm does, makes you excited about the possibility of like, but what if we play a 70-minute game? Like, Riot could design Gathering Storm to stop at 30 minutes. They could. Or at 40 minutes. Or at 50 or whatever. But that encourages you to say, oh, but if I don't get to 50, I didn't get the full rune. Or, you know, well, it can only ever give this much. But if you give the promise of scaling to infinity, it just does a little bit to make you feel excited. So going back now from that thing, I initially liked the idea of the law of large numbers, the tenet of large numbers, saying, hey, look how much gold you could get. But it seems to me that bounties feel like more of a negative than a positive. Even though pragmatically this is not different in any way at all, it's purely a visual representation, people are going to feel less bad about their bounties. That's the way it is. People look at bounties on the scoreboard and look at their bounty, or the bounty of the guy that's carrying them. Then they look at, but can they kill that Riven though? That's what it seems to be. That people seem to look at bounties like it's trailing toilet paper stuck to your shoe, not a piñata. So instead, constraining the number, constraining the penalty, or making it not even look like a penalty, for example, World of Warcraft rest XP, that makes the game more fun. So this is a very good change, I think, a lot. Okay, very long point about something that has literally no gameplay relevance. This is cool as well. They've gone through the types of ability triggers and put them finally into main categories. Ability, dot, AoE, pet. Also, dot and AoE, the same thing. Sorry, I'm trolling. Mostly it's under the hood, but there are some specific abilities that matter. Essentially what it means is like all pets will trigger Riley's, Liandry's, and Luden's. Making sure that things that are AoEs and or dots are now all of the same or both. And it means that you've got things like, bam, Glacial Storm and Trample count as damage over time and AoE for things that did reduce stuff for damage over time. For example, like Comet. Comet refreshes its cooldown on ability hit, but a damage over time ability hit is obviously fraudulent and hits very, very, very many times. It's kind of unfair. And things like Spell Vamp is reduced for AoE. Now, what I think should actually happen, is Spell Vamp should actually be per minion versus champions. That instead of an AoE versus single target sort of classification here, where things like Annie can just queue minions one at a time and just blow them up, and Vladimir can queue minions and this cooldown super, super short, and it's arguably better than anything else. I think actually a better design for that would be, for Spell Vamp specifically, minion versus champion, and minions are 1/3 regardless of whether they're AoE or not. But that's its own thing. We're not going to talk about that too much more. But this is good to have proper classification. All this stuff will now work appropriately with things like Comet, work appropriately with things like Spell Vamp. That's a good thing. Also, all these pets will now trigger on-hit ability effects. So Spiderlings will trigger Luden's and Riley, so Elise has permaslow in spider form. Jack-in-the-Boxes will trigger Luden's now as well. Xyrus Plants already did. Dragon Ghost is an AoE for things like Spell Vamp, but that already happened as well. Heimer's turrets, turret lasers, ult turret shots, and ult turret lasers are AoE effects. But the turret basic shot triggers Luden's, triggers Riley's. Unless I'm misreading this, but this shouldn't be a lie. Pets are spells, so they trigger effects. Oh boy, this could be a pretty big deal. Now, I do want to point out, though, that Heimer's turrets don't really hit champions unless you auto the champion or land a spell on them, and landing a spell on them would already trigger Riley's or Liandry's. But the fact that the turret basic shots will just trigger Luden's on the minion waves that you're clearing can be a really, really big deal. This could be very massive. We'll see what happens. Voidlings can do similar stuff. Also basic attacks for dodging. Yorick Schools didn't really matter for Yorick, but that could matter. Annie's Tibbers, I think, already did apply things like Leandries and whatnot. Daisy is cool. You know, she'll apply things that, I mean, not like he would really ever build things, but I do think it will matter as a spell for things like Athenes. That Ivern, like, you know, Annie triggers Athenes better, but good luck shielding someone. Ivern's going to trigger Athenes better. That's going to matter a little bit there. So that kind of stuff kind of will chip in, will matter a little bit. Little bits of things that matter a little bit there. So that's kind of cool. Here's some misc changes. Yes, Q2 for Victor is now a spell. Now it works because it's against damage over time because they've all been reclassified in Dot. Aerie now triggers more consistently about stuff, but yes, Corrupting Potion, Scorch, and stuff won't. Yasuo Q. Secondary targets are now accounted for by runes. That's good because now it's a spell for the rest of the stuff. Great. The secondary version, of course, the same. Cool. All right. Position ranks, of course, are fully dead in NA and Korea. Positional matchmaking, I believe, still there. So I'm still queuing as Phil this season, and I'll be match made as a worse top laner than I am AD carry, which is what I wanted. But I will have just one elo. Or one visible rank, I guess. And that seems positive. They are demoting all the Challenger, Master, Grandmaster players to Master. Diamond players going down one division. D4 goes to 0 LP. 2 wins or loss becomes 1 win or loss becomes 2. 2 becomes 1 1. Okay, whatever. You'll keep your rewards, but they match your rank. Okay, great. And then Grandmaster and Challenger are going to unlock soon after the reset. Okay, so that's cool. That was the problem for high elo players. Doesn't matter for most of us, but there you go. Rated bugginess with uncapped frame rate. Just cap your frame rate. Doesn't matter. Don't overwork your video card. Save some power. Save some electricity bills. Also, who cares? Missions tracker can group missions together. That's pretty sweet. That's a nice little thing. Lever buster slightly better. Sometimes fail to detect the lever. It's more lenient if you come back and win. Now it counts with the fact that, hey, different companies have different internet powers. So no one leaves because of a DC in Korea. They leave because they didn't pay for their time in the PC bong or actually left the game, whereas other countries have worse connectivity. Pre-made 5s, lever buster makes sense because you're with your friends. You're not trolling your friends. Corpus AI. I assume there's sort of similar reasons, or it's just simply new players. Because there's no experienced players that are playing Corpus AI for any reason other than playing with new players, so that makes sense there. These all seem like pretty good changes. I think these are really good. I don't think any of them are going to get abused by any meaningful way. A bunch of bug fixes that I'm not going to read through because they don't typically matter. Fuzz Fizz, Pretty Kitty Rangar, Prestige Fuzz Fizz, Meowrick, Corky. Pretty skins. Nice stuff there. Some chromas, cool stuff. Almost an hour in. Let's TLDR patch 9.6. Kayle is overpowered and will remain overpowered. Neeko is fine as a mage and a reasonably playable on-hit champion. It's hard to know if this buff means more than this nerf, but it does mean that Mage Neeko is continuing to be powerful and is totally playable. Next up, Ornn getting very small changes, most notably the W cooldown. Q and E working better together is nice as well. Overall, he's roughly viable, so should be fine. Major changes to Urgot that makes his W a toggle at max rank and makes the shield go on to E. Overall, he's being bribed to build more attack damage to be more of a damage champion and less of a tank that goes cleaver into full tank. We'll see if that works, but it's certainly going to push him in that way. He needs the buffs. These changes do look like overall buffs, but it's hard to say there's so many changes going in. Aatrox is better against Vladimir. Caitlyn's small ult damage, but she's fine already. Aatrox also seems to be fine already. Gnar, very small change. Is not going to mean much IMO. Small buff to Hecarim, who is generally fine, so that's going to be just reasonable. Really minor buff to Ivern, who seems to be fine. Moderate health nerfs to Jayce. He's definitely overpowered in solo queue and pro. This is a good change. Will be more all-inable and more pokeable. Small nerfs to LeBlanc will lower her priority somewhat as well. That seems like a positive. Make her less of a good late-game team fighter, more of a side lane split pusher. You have to use that to win the game. Nautilus is a reasonably powerful champion already. Nice little 3.5 armor and better cooldown on the passive. Will push him over the top into, I think, completely viable territory and worth playing. Very small nerfs to Rek'Sai, I think, are too small. She will remain probably maybe still the number 1 jungler in pro, but I think probably still top 4. And a very high win rate solo queue champion as well. Shen, I think, is getting pushed into viable territory. This might be enough to make him last hit turrets or last hit minions under turret, which is a pretty big deal. And I think it's been just sort of on the wings, ready to be playable. Should be fine. Sylas should be re-enabled in pro play by this point in time. Yeah, should be totally viable. AP Sylas is the best build. These nerfs do matter a little bit. They will drop him a little, but he'll remain above 50% win rate in solo queue and should remain a presence in pro play. Smallest to Trundle are very, very small. Probably sits sub 50, but that's okay. What I think are very large buffs to Xayah, you max this 1 second. It's a pretty big deal. I want to see Essence Reaver in your builds here for this cooldown to come up more often. And ultimately, I think she'll be an above 50% win rate champion. We'll see a lot more Xayah Rakan this patch. Now, that said, I don't know if they win against things like Thresh Kalista. But if they beat Kalista lanes, Xayah Rakan is the #1 lane in League of Legends. If they don't beat Kalista lanes, then they can still be bullied out. I just don't know that answer right now. Next up, some small nerfs to Zoe. Wasn't too crazy in solo queue. Was a fairly big pro pick. This is going to matter somewhat. She'll drop maybe 1.5% in solo queue and will drop down to maybe the #6 mage in pro. Double tier is going away, which will drop Ezreal's presence even more. It won't make him that much weaker overall. And he also is a champion that needs some compensation buffs later on down the line. He is, I think, overall slightly weak in solo queue. It's not that bad, but yeah, I think he will eventually need some love as a result of these changes. Dematerializer getting pushed a little bit out of pro. You only clear 3 minutes instead of 6 is a pretty big deal. Your overall bonus damage to wave clear after that is roughly the same, but less charge is going to be a pretty big deal. This is another love tap that pushes you away from tank supports in solo queue as well, or sorry, in pro play specifically. It's another straw to help break the camel's back to make ranged supports come back in pro play. Ranged are already the best champions in solo queue. Bridging that gap would be nice at some point. Small nerfs to overheal will probably still not change what pro AD carries bring, but will bridge that gap slightly. Okay, whatever. Bounties decreased from 35% or 33% to 25% of the gold earned from minions and monsters over your opponent's average. They can now decrease, which is a very big deal. Support item gold is now part of the calculation at reasonable numbers. And also, you can now get a bounty if you are hard crushing on your support. AKA you're playing Zyra. That's going to be a Zyra nerf, by the way. Zyra nerf coming in again. And now the bounty does not show you the base 300 kill gold. Boom. All right. Also a fairly large change to make abilities trigger things more consistently. This will ultimately end up being nerfs to most of these abilities that they will trigger Spell Vamp or Comet less well. And now pets will all afflict Ryleys and Liandry's and things like that, which is most notably, I think, a buff to Heimerdinger's basic turret shots. Other miscellaneous changes that all work for consistency. You can read through this if you want yourself, but it's pretty cool. Rank changes, which don't affect most of us. Frame rate, whatever. Mission Stock looks better. Lever Buster looks better. Bug is always good. And again, look at these pretty skins. That's it for the patch rundown. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.